February 1944. Allied bomber formations sliced through the grey skies over northern Germany. The B-17s and B-24s moved in calculated precision, flak bursts punctuating the clouds beneath them. But the men in the cockpits knew the skies held a new, unknown terror. Reports from reconnaissance pilots had been trickling in for months, flashes of metal that moved faster than anything they had seen, disappearing before gunners could even get a bead. At first, intelligence officers dismissed them as exaggerations, the product of nerves frayed by endless sorties. But the photographs told a different story. Shadows of sleek aircraft, almost invisible at altitude, streaking along air corridors previously considered safe. The Luftwaffe's secret weapon was the Messerschmitt Me 262. In workshops hidden from Allied eyes, engineers led by Waldemar Voigt had pushed Germany into the jet age. The Jumo 004 engines roared with unprecedented speed, propelling the Me 262 to nearly 540 miles per hour, outmatching the fastest piston engine fighters like the P-51 Mustang or the P-47 Thunderbolt. By the time Allied pilots saw it, it was often too late to react. Even experienced aces, men who had survived hundreds of missions over Europe, admitted to a visceral fear. The aircraft was faster, climbed better, and struck with a suddenness that defied conventional tactics. June 1944, the Me-262 made its operational debut against the 8th Air Force's bombing formations. American gunners reported flashes at their flanks, an aircraft that seemed to appear from nowhere. 4 30mm cannons erupted from its nose, ripping through the B-17's aluminum hull with terrifying efficiency. The bomber crews were caught in a dilemma. Tighten formations to maximize defensive firepower, yet remain slow targets for jets, or scatter and risk being isolated. In one documented sortie, a flight of 16 Me-262s claimed 5 bombers in under 10 minutes. Allied intelligence scrambled to understand the threat. Reports were cross-referenced with Luftwaffe sortie logs, pilot interviews, and post-war interrogations. The conclusion was grim. This was not just a faster fighter, it was a fundamentally different approach to air combat. Allied pilots quickly learned that dogfighting the Me-262 with traditional boom and zoom tactics was almost suicidal. The jets could accelerate beyond any chasing piston engine fighter in level flight. Encounters often ended in a single pass. The Me-262 would appear, fire, and vanish before any retaliation could be mounted. Allied pilots adapted, focusing attacks on vulnerable points, takeoff and landing strips, where jets were slow and engines fragile. But this required knowledge, timing, and courage. There were no easy victories. Even the Hawker Tempest, flown by the RAF, struggled to intercept the jets without heavy coordination. The psychological toll was profound. Flight logs from USAAF units describe pilots encountering the Me-262 as ghosts, spectres, and impossible aircraft. One 8th Air Force pilot, surviving a near miss over the Ruhr, wrote that it was like chasing lightning, and the lightning always had the first strike. This fear was compounded by the jet's operational unpredictability. Short engine lifespans, high maintenance demands, and limited fuel supply restricted sorties. Yet when deployed, the Me-262's impact was immediate, causing disruption, confusion, and anxiety among bomber crews and fighter escorts alike. Yet the Me-262 never reached its full potential. Hitler's insistence on using it as a fighter bomber diluted its role as an interceptor. Fuel shortages, bombed-out runways, and inexperienced pilots limited operational effectiveness. By late 1944, the Allies began to adapt. P-51 Mustangs patrolled Me-262 airfields, catching jets during takeoff and landing, exploiting the only real vulnerability of these powerful machines. Still, the Me-262 forced a recalibration of Allied air strategy. Escort formations were altered, bomber altitude profiles shifted, and fighter tactics adjusted to account for the possibility of a jet attack. Historical records make the Me-262's influence clear. Luftwaffe documents, corroborated by USAAF victory credits and post-war interviews, indicate that the jet scored a disproportionate effect despite small numbers. Less than 1,400 units were operational by the war's end, a fraction of the tens of thousands of Allied aircraft in the theatre. Even so, the psychological and tactical impact on Allied airmen was disproportionate to the numbers. For months, pilots faced an enemy that could not be engaged in traditional combat, a spectral predator in the skies over Germany. In the final months of the war, captured jets were evaluated by USAAF, RAF, and Soviet teams. Engineers marveled at the design, the speed, and the concept, but also recognized the limitations. Had the Me-262 been produced in large numbers, with sufficient fuel and experienced pilots, its influence on the aerial war over Europe might have been transformative. Instead, logistical constraints, strategic mismanagement, and relentless Allied air superiority ensured that the ghosts of Jet Alley never changed the war's outcome. Yet the legacy endured. Pilots' accounts, post-war symposiums, and technical evaluations shaped Cold War jet doctrine. The terror the Me-262 inspired left an indelible mark on Allied air strategy, influencing tactics, training, and aircraft design for decades. The jet did not win the war, but it almost did. It forced the Allies to confront a future of faster, deadlier air combat, where courage and skill alone might not be enough. And for the men who faced it in the skies above Germany, the memory of that ghostly streak of metal, fire, and sound would never fade. March 1944. The skies over Germany had become a chessboard of steel and fire. Reconnaissance flights reported increased Luftwaffe activity, but nothing had prepared the Allies for the first confirmed Me-262 engagement. Intelligence had hinted at jet technology in late 1943, but photographs were grainy and reports seemed exaggerated. Then, in early March, a P-51 Mustang pilot escorting a bomber formation over the industrial Ruhr region witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The jet appeared like a phantom. At first, he mistook it for a high-speed reconnaissance aircraft, but the speed and the unusual silhouette were unmistakable. Its twin engines emitted a high-pitched whine, unlike any piston engine sound he had ever heard. Before he could react, the aircraft swung past, unleashing a torrent of 30mm rounds that tore through the fuselage of a nearby B-17. The pilot's logs later described the attack as instantaneous, precise, and terrifying. There was no time to think, only to survive. Allied commanders immediately ordered a review of escort tactics. Reports from bomber crews painted a consistent picture. The Me-262 attacked with surgical efficiency, then disappeared before fighters could intercept. Attempts to climb to meet them often failed. The jets accelerated beyond any piston-engine aircraft in level flight. Dogfighting, the tried-and-true method against Luftwaffe piston fighters, was almost useless. Intelligence officers began compiling detailed profiles of the Me-262, analysing photographs, engine schematics captured from downed aircraft, and pilot testimonies. In April, Luftwaffe records show that Jagdgeschwader 7, JG-7, the first operational Me-262 wing, began sorties over the Ruhr and Rhineland. Each mission followed a precise pattern: high-speed intercepts at bomber altitude, followed by rapid egress along pre-planned routes. Allied radar operators noticed the jet's high-speed approach, but interception was difficult. P-47s and P-51s could barely close the gap before the Me-262 was already disappearing on its way back to base. Bomber gunners, trained to anticipate attacks from conventional fighters, were confounded by the jet's sudden strikes. The psychological impact was immense. Mission reports describe crews as nervous, jumpy, and hyper-aware, constantly scanning the skies for the telltale glint of jet engines. For the first time, bomber formations could no longer rely solely on their own defensive firepower. Escort fighters were stretched thin, forced to cover more territory and maintain higher alertness levels. Morale, while resilient, wavered under the shadow of an enemy that defied standard combat rules. Allied pilots experimented with tactics to counter the Me-262. Intelligence concluded that the jets were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when engines operated at low thrust and acceleration was limited. Photo reconnaissance identified a network of dispersed airfields in northern Germany used by JG-7. P-51 units began patrolling near these airfields, attempting to intercept jets during these critical windows. Some pilots reported success, shooting down Me-262s on takeoff or landing approaches, but the opportunity was fleeting and heavily defended by flak. Technical assessments followed every engagement. Captured engine components and airframes were sent to Wright Field and other research centres for evaluation. Engineers marvelled at the jet's swept fuselage, tricycle landing gear, and pioneering Jumo 004 engines. Maintenance logs revealed, however, the aircraft's fragility. Engines could fail within 25 operational hours, and parts shortages plagued production. Allied intelligence realised that while the Me-262 could dominate the skies in a single sortie, the Germans could not sustain prolonged operations. Despite these limitations, combat reports continued to underscore the jet's terror factor. In May 1944, a B-24 formation en route to Essen was intercepted by a squadron of Me-262s. In less than 5 minutes, 2 bombers were downed, and several more were damaged. Debriefings noted the jet's almost supernatural speed, the accuracy of its nose-mounted cannons, and the almost imperceptible approach angle that allowed pilots to attack without warning. Historians later cross-referenced these claims with Luftwaffe records, confirming the Me-262's effectiveness despite limited numbers. The Allies also faced operational challenges. Radar coverage was still improving, and the Me-262 could exploit gaps with ease. Fighter pilots were forced to anticipate engagements based on intelligence reports rather than visual contact, relying on formations and timing to respond. The presence of the jet forced changes in bomber routing, altitude selection, and timing, sometimes adding hours to missions. For the air crews, every sortie carried the added anxiety of facing an adversary faster than anything they had trained against. By mid-1944, the Me-262's influence had reached strategic levels. The threat forced Allied planners to reassess bombing campaign priorities, allocating more fighter resources to protect bomber streams over key industrial zones. Analysts at the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later noted that while the jets did not prevent Allied bombing, they significantly increased operational costs and pilot fatigue. Psychological impact, often overlooked in raw statistics, proved decisive. Crews entered combat knowing an almost invisible predator could appear at any moment, strike, and vanish without warning. Post-war interviews with Allied pilots further illuminate the terror inspired by the Me-262. One RAF ace recalled, "We knew the Luftwaffe was desperate, but this was different. You saw it once, and you remembered it forever. It wasn't just fast. It was lethal and untouchable in ways that no plane had been before." USAAF pilots echoed similar sentiments, describing a fear that was not just of being shot down, but of the sheer unpredictability of the jets. The Me-262 redefined the concept of air superiority, forcing pilots to confront speed, firepower, and tactical innovation in a single, terrifying package. By late 1944, the Allies had begun integrating lessons learned. Fighter tactics evolved, emphasizing patrols near airfields and coordinated interceptions. Bomber formations adjusted altitudes and routes. Intelligence and reconnaissance units expanded focus on Me-262 deployment patterns. Yet, even as adaptation occurred, the legend of the jet persisted. Allied airmen, whether surviving encounters or reading post-mission reports, understood that the Me-262 was not just an aircraft, it was a psychological weapon, one that could shake confidence, alter strategy, and make even seasoned veterans cautious in ways the Luftwaffe had never achieved with piston-engine fighters. In the annals of aerial warfare, the Me-262's debut in 1944 represents a pivot point, a terrifying glimpse into the future of air combat. It demonstrated that speed, firepower, and tactical innovation could temporarily outmatch experience, training, and numerical superiority. For Allied pilots, it was a lesson learned at high cost, a lesson that would shape air doctrine for generations to come. Spring 1944. The Me-262 had firmly entered Allied consciousness, not as a rumour but as a cold, harsh reality over the skies of Western Europe. Its mere presence forced pilots, planners, and engineers into a frantic race to understand and counter an aircraft that was, in many ways, decades ahead of its time. Technical reports from captured wrecks, intelligence intercepts, and post-mission reconnaissance photographs began to reveal the jet's design philosophy. The Messerschmitt engineers had taken lessons from earlier piston-engine aircraft and adapted them for the jet age. Twin Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets, mounted under sharply swept wings, allowed the Me-262 to reach speeds of 540 miles per hour, nearly 150 miles per hour faster than the fastest Allied fighters. In the cockpit, instruments were minimalistic, emphasizing essential flight data, but the acceleration and climb rates required nerves of steel and lightning reflexes. The Me-262 could accelerate past Allied fighters before they could even raise their sights, a fact that became painfully evident in every encounter. Combat reports indicate that Luftwaffe pilots quickly learned the limits and quirks of their new machines. Engine reliability was the Achilles heel of the Me-262. Turbojets of the era were prone to flameouts, compressor stalls, and catastrophic failure if throttled too abruptly. Pilots were trained to use conservative throttle inputs, particularly during takeoff and combat maneuvers. Despite this, the jet's speed advantage compensated for many of these weaknesses. In multiple documented engagements, Allied P-51s and P-47s could not maintain contact long enough to exploit the jet's mechanical vulnerabilities. The operational doctrine of the Me-262 also emphasized short, high-speed attack runs. Unlike piston fighters, which could engage in prolonged dogfights, Me-262 pilots were instructed to fire only at optimal range and then retreat to safe altitudes. Their 30mm Mk-108 cannons, mounted in the nose, could destroy a B-17 or Lancaster with a single volley. Allied bomber crews reported that a single hit could tear a bomber apart mid-air, leaving little chance for escape. Observers noted the terrifying efficiency. The jets were not just fast, they were methodical and precise, combining speed, altitude advantage, and concentrated firepower. Allied intelligence officers worked tirelessly to counter these new threats. Reconnaissance flights documented Luftwaffe airfield locations, hangar dispersal patterns, and radar coverage gaps. Photo interpreters noted clusters of Me-262s often hidden behind decoy buildings or camouflaged netting, a tactic designed to evade Allied bombers. By cross-referencing pilot testimonies and radar data, the Allies began to predict likely flight paths, but interception remained difficult. The jet's rapid climb and acceleration meant that even when detected, they could outpace response aircraft. One particularly chilling encounter occurred in late May 1944, when a formation of 36 B-17s en route to Essen was attacked by 4 Me-262s. According to bomber logs, the jets struck from above and behind, firing with pinpoint accuracy before disappearing beyond the reach of escort fighters. 2 B-17s were downed instantly, and 2 more sustained critical damage. The surviving crews described the attack as a flash of silver and fire, faster than any man could comprehend, leaving destruction in its wake. Post-war examination of Luftwaffe records confirmed the attack, highlighting the jet's ability to inflict disproportionate damage despite limited numbers. The psychological impact on Allied pilots cannot be overstated. Mission reports from May to June 1944 repeatedly mention anxiety and hypervigilance. Pilots flying P-51s were trained to expect conventional Luftwaffe fighters, Focke-Wulfs, Messerschmitt, Bf-109s, and FW-1900s, but the Me-262 introduced a completely new variable. Even experienced aces admitted to being unnerved by the jet's acceleration and firepower. Morale, while resilient, faced a subtle but persistent strain. Leaders noticed that pilots were sometimes hesitant to dive into engagements for fear of encountering a Me-262, a testament to the aircraft's psychological as well as physical threat. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe tactical doctrine evolved to exploit every advantage. Squadrons coordinated high-speed hit-and-run formations, timing attacks to coincide with bomber formation's most vulnerable moments. Ground controllers used radar plots to vector jets toward incoming Allied formations. Pilots were trained to take off in small waves, minimizing exposure to Allied fighters patrolling the airfields. These tactics, combined with the jet's superior speed, made the Me-262 a near-perfect interceptor for the late-war skies, even if the Luftwaffe lacked sufficient numbers to alter the overall air campaign. Allied engineers and tacticians, however, were not idle. Intelligence suggested that Me-262 engines were highly sensitive to foreign object ingestion during takeoff and landing. Pilots were advised to target jets during these vulnerable moments, but doing so carried immense risk. Flak defences around German airfields were dense, and strafing a runway required precision, bravery, and luck. Nevertheless, several successful interceptions were recorded in late 1944 and early 1945, when P-51s and P-47s managed to shoot down Me-262s during low-speed approaches. Each kill was celebrated, but the jet's speed and agility meant these opportunities were rare. Technical assessments also revealed vulnerabilities in operational sustainability. The Jumo 004 engines were difficult to maintain, with shortages of spare parts and trained mechanics. Mechanical failures were frequent, and jet units often faced grounding due to maintenance backlogs. Allied intelligence predicted that while the Me-262 could dominate in short engagements, it could not sustain continuous sorties. By combining tactical awareness, numerical superiority, and attrition strategies, Allied planners aimed to neutralize the jet's potential impact over time. Yet, the terror lingered. Even as the war neared its final year, the Me-262 symbolized the terrifying possibilities of the jet age. For Allied pilots, each encounter represented a brush with a new era of aerial warfare, a fleeting glimpse of speed, precision, and lethality unmatched by piston-engine fighters. Veterans later recalled that the mere mention of the Me-262 prompted heightened alertness, a subtle tension that never fully dissipated until Germany's surrender. Post-war evaluations, including the US Strategic Bombing Survey and pilot interviews, consistently emphasized that the Me-262 had altered the strategic calculus. Its effectiveness in small-scale engagements forced the Allies to adapt flight patterns, allocate additional fighter cover, and increase reconnaissance operations. The jet had not won the war for Germany, but it had reshaped combat strategy and left an indelible mark on aviation history. In the annals of World War II, the Me-262 represents both a technical marvel and a tactical nightmare. It demonstrated the transformative potential of jet propulsion in combat, foreshadowing a new age of aerial warfare. More importantly, it served as a harsh reminder to Allied pilots. Even superior numbers and experience could be challenged by innovation, speed, and a willingness to exploit technological breakthroughs to their fullest. In these high-speed duels over Germany, the Me-262 was both hunter and symbol, a harbinger of the jet age that was about to redefine the skies forever. By mid-1944, Allied pilots had begun to encounter the Me-262 more frequently, though engagements remained sporadic. Intelligence had pieced together the jet's operational patterns. Short, rapid sorties launched from dispersed, camouflaged airfields, usually under the cover of darkness or cloud cover. For Allied pilots, even knowing this did little to reduce the terror. When a flash of silver appeared above the bomber formations, a split-second decision could mean survival or death. One of the earliest documented encounters occurred on August 25, 1944, over the skies of northern France. A flight of 12 P-51 Mustangs from the 361 Fighter Group, led by Major William Bill S. Leary, was escorting a formation of 60 B-17 flying fortresses bound for industrial targets near Le Havre. Radar and visual spotting indicated unusual speed in the Luftwaffe interceptors. Within seconds, the flight saw the flash of two Me-262s diving toward the bombers. Their speed was overwhelming. The P-51s, capable of 440 miles per hour, could not close the distance fast enough. Reports from Leary's debrief highlight the chaos. "They came down like silver lightning," he later wrote in his log. "The bombers didn't have time to react. One burst of their cannons and two were gone before we could even line up." Post-war examination of Luftwaffe archives confirmed the two Me-262s had launched from Haguenau, nearly 50 miles from the interception point, and returned safely to their base with minimal fuel expenditure, a round trip that traditional piston fighters could scarcely match. The Me-262's combination of speed and firepower made it ideal for boom and zoom attacks. Pilots were instructed to approach only at optimal firing ranges of roughly 800 to 1,200 meters, delivering concentrated bursts of 30mm fire. Allied bomber crews recalled the devastation. One B-17 gunner, Staff Sergeant James Riley, described it in testimony during the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium. "1 second you were lining up your sight, the next there was a flash and a roar, then silence. It didn't seem real, like some nightmare machine had sliced through our formation. Even when Allied fighters attempted to counter, the Me-262 had advantages that were difficult to mitigate. Its climb rate allowed it to disengage vertically, while its acceleration left pursuing aircraft struggling to gain on it. A formation of P-47 Thunderbolts reported in September 1944 that repeated attempts to engage Me-262S often ended with the jets disappearing into clouds or vanishing over the horizon before effective firing solutions could be achieved. The psychological impact was clear. Pilots knew that a single mistake or even hesitation could be fatal. To combat the jets, Allied commanders devised new tactics. One strategy involved setting ambushes near Luftwaffe airfields, exploiting the Me-262's vulnerability during takeoff and landing. Airfields at Lechfeld, Neuburg and Brandenburg were targeted by P-51 and P-47 squadrons, often at first light or late afternoon, when jets were most likely to be operational. These jet traps sometimes yielded results. In early October 1944, Squadron Leader John R. Hicks of the 4th Fighter Group intercepted a Me-262 attempting to return to Lechfeld. A burst of .50 caliber fire struck the jet's tail assembly, causing it to crash land. While such kills were rare, they provided invaluable lessons for Allied pilots. Speed alone did not render the aircraft invulnerable. Intelligence reports also documented Luftwaffe deployment patterns. Jet units were typically small, rarely exceeding 12 aircraft per sortie. The Messerschmitt 262s were split between defensive interceptor roles against Allied bombers and limited fighter-bomber missions targeting rail yards, bridges and supply depots. This meant that while their raw performance was extraordinary, they could not achieve the massed force required to turn the tide of the air war. Allied strategists noted that attrition and fuel shortages further constrained their effectiveness. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was struggling to maintain sufficient trained pilots, mechanics and jet fuel to sustain continuous operations. Nevertheless, individual encounters demonstrated just how dangerous the Me 262 could be. A post-war interrogation of Luftwaffe ace Lieutenant Franz Schall revealed a typical engagement scenario. We would climb above the bombers, dive at full throttle, and fire a short burst from 1,000 meters. The bombers did not survive more than 1 or 2 hits. Then we would climb away before the Mustangs could react. Speed was our ally, and surprise was everything. Allied pilots noted that the precision and lethality of these attacks were unlike anything seen from conventional piston engine fighters. The Me 262 also forced strategic adjustments in Allied air operations. Bomber formations were altered, with additional fighter cover assigned to routes where jet activity was suspected. Reconnaissance flights increased in frequency, seeking to locate and track jet airfields. Some units experimented with specialized radar-guided vectoring to anticipate jet attacks, though the technology of the day had limitations. Commanders were forced to weigh the risk of sending heavy bombers over industrial targets versus the potential losses from even a small number of Me 262s. Despite these fears, historical records indicate that the Me 262 never achieved the operational density required to influence the overall war outcome. A combination of fuel shortages, Allied air superiority, pilot inexperience, and logistical constraints limited the jet's impact. By early 1945, attrition had reduced operational Me 262 squadrons to a fraction of their planned strength. Yet the terror they inspired was disproportionate to their numbers. Pilots recounted that the jet's appearance could halt attacks, scatter formations, or force evasive maneuvers, exactly the psychological effect the Luftwaffe sought. Even so, the lessons learned from these encounters would shape post-war aviation. The Allied assessment of the Me 262 contributed directly to the development of jet fighter doctrine, high-speed aerial tactics, and the understanding of the limitations imposed by logistics and operational tempo. In the sky, the Me 262 was a glimpse into the future, a demonstration of speed, precision, and destructive potential that forced both sides to adapt in real time. In the end, Part 4 of this story underscores the dual nature of the Me 262, a tactical nightmare and a technological marvel. Each engagement highlighted the strengths of jet propulsion, precision weaponry, and tactical innovation, while simultaneously exposing vulnerabilities in logistics and operational sustainability. For Allied pilots, every encounter reinforced a simple but terrifying truth. In the hands of a skilled pilot, the Messerschmitt Me 262 was nearly unstoppable, an icon of the jet age and a reminder of the rapidly changing nature of aerial warfare. By late 1944, the Allies had fully recognized the existential threat posed by the Messerschmitt Me 262. Reports from the U.S. Strategic Air Force and the Royal Air Force's 2nd Tactical Air Force underscored the necessity of developing specialized countermeasures. Though rare in number, the jet's speed and firepower had already inflicted substantial losses among bomber formations. Commanders understood that conventional fighter escort tactics were insufficient. New approaches were required to neutralize the threat without incurring catastrophic losses. One key adaptation involved the establishment of airfield ambushes, targeting Me 262s during takeoff or landing. Intelligence gathered from reconnaissance, prisoner interrogations, and signals interception pinpointed Luftwaffe bases in Bavaria, Saxony, and northern Germany, where the jets were most active. Pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group, flying long-range P-51 Mustangs, were tasked with patrolling near these airfields, exploiting the Me 262's limited acceleration at low speed. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin H. Giles recalled during a post-war debriefing, "The jets were lightning in the air, but on the ground, or struggling into the air, they became vulnerable. One well-placed burst, and the threat was neutralized before they could reach cruising altitude." These ambushes were not without risk. German anti-aircraft batteries, alerted by Luftwaffe crews, often targeted approaching Allied fighters. Coordinating attacks required meticulous planning. Pilots used high-altitude approach routes and timed dives to avoid radar detection and flak concentration. During one operation over Lechfeld in November 1944, a flight of 8 P-51s managed to destroy 3 Me-262s on the ground while suffering minimal losses. Although modest in scale, such attacks disrupted Luftwaffe sortie schedules and demonstrated that even revolutionary aircraft had vulnerabilities. At the same time, tactical doctrine evolved to engage Me-262s in the air. Recognizing the jet's superior speed, Allied pilots focused on coordinated pack tactics, forcing the Me-262 into turning fights or preemptive dives where piston-engine fighters could maintain contact. Squadron leader Arthur Art Whitaker of the 4th Fighter Group recalled the method. "We couldn't win in a straight sprint. We baited them into maneuvers where their acceleration advantage was nullified. It was dangerous, but we learned quickly that patience and teamwork could force errors." Historical records indicate that Allied commanders also attempted specialized training programs for jet interception. Pilots were briefed on Me-262 performance characteristics: maximum speed of 540 miles per hour, climb rate of 4,900 feet per minute, and armament of 430mm Mk 108 cannons. Simulated attacks in P-47s and P-51s emphasized recognition, approach angles, and firing solutions under extreme time constraints. While these exercises could not replicate the terror of encountering a live Me-262, they increased survival rates during engagements. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, was struggling to maintain operational strength. Post-war interrogation reports of German officers reveal chronic fuel shortages, limited spare parts, and inexperienced pilots rapidly promoted to fill vacancies. Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Becker described the challenges in early 1945. "We had the planes, but few could fly them effectively. Jet engines were delicate. A single technical failure could mean a forced landing, or worse. Our operations became intermittent. Almost desperate Allied intelligence corroborated these accounts, noting that sortie numbers for operational Me-262 squadrons dropped precipitously after December 1944, while losses on the ground increased due to repeated airfield attacks. Despite these limitations, the Me-262 remained lethal. RAF Bomber Command's debriefings from January 1945 highlight incidents where jets attacked Mosquito and Lancaster formations over the Ruhr. Even a small number of Me-262s caused confusion, forced evasive maneuvers, and inflicted several losses, underscoring the psychological and tactical impact of jet operations. Pilots reported that even the perception of a Me-262 overhead could disrupt formations, demonstrating the aircraft's unique ability to project fear beyond its numbers. To further mitigate the threat, the Allies integrated advanced radar vectoring and night fighter patrols. Radar operators monitored known jet bases and predicted flight paths, providing timely warnings to bomber formations. Combined with rapid response P-51 and P-47 flights, these measures reduced exposure to Me-262s, though intercepting a jet in combat still demanded split-second precision. A September 1944 engagement near Magdeburg illustrated the challenge. A Me-262 pilot, Lieutenant Hans Joachim Riebel, reportedly evaded 3 P-51s and escaped into cloud cover after a single devastating cannon strike on a bomber. The encounter epitomized the difficulty of combating a weapon that combined speed, firepower, and tactical ingenuity. Attrition, more than tactical adaptation, ultimately curtailed the Me-262's impact. Post-war analyses show that of the 1,400 jets produced, only a fraction, approximately 300 to 350, remained operational by March 1945. Allied air raids, fuel scarcity, and inexperienced pilots reduced sortie effectiveness. Operational efficiency dropped further as Allied bombing destroyed rail networks and fuel depots, preventing the jets from reaching the front lines. By the time the Allies penetrated into central Germany, Many Me-262s were grounded, awaiting maintenance or fuel that never arrived. Yet the legacy of the Me-262 endured. Its presence accelerated Allied jet development, influenced post-war fighter design, and reshaped air combat doctrine. Pilots who survived encounters carried vivid memories of its raw power. Lieutenant James Riley, reflecting on his experience over northern France, stated in a 1985 veterans reunion in Hawaii, "You never forgot the sound, the speed. You could see it, and know there was almost nothing you could do. That plane, it changed everything." Part 5 concludes by highlighting the dual reality of the Me-262. An aircraft that, if fully deployed with adequate resources, might have inflicted devastating losses on Allied air operations, yet constrained by logistics, attrition, and overwhelming Allied numbers, it remained a tactical terror rather than a strategic game-changer. Allied adaptation, both in tactics and intelligence, neutralized much of its potential, while post-war studies cemented its role as the harbinger of the jet age, an icon of technological innovation and a reminder that even the most advanced weapon cannot succeed without support, training, and opportunity. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe's Me-262 units faced the convergence of dwindling resources, relentless Allied pressure, and the erosion of experienced personnel. Operational records from the post-war Allied translator and interpreter section indicate that jet squadrons were chronically understrength. Missions were often flown by novices fresh from abbreviated training programs, with many pilots having only a handful of flight hours in jet aircraft. Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller of JG-7 recalled during interrogation in 1945, "We were flying wonders of engineering, yet we were not masters of them. Every sortie was a gamble with the aircraft, the enemy, and fate." The first months of 1945 marked the Me-262's last concerted efforts to influence the course of air combat. Despite severe attrition, the jets were tasked with intercepting Allied bomber streams targeting German industrial centres such as the Ruhr, Hamburg, and Berlin. Combat records from the U.S. Strategic Air Forces report that a small number of Me-262s achieved tactical success. B-17 and B-24 bombers were shot down, formations disrupted, and bomber crews forced into evasive maneuvers that increased fuel consumption and risk of collision. One account from a 3rd Bomb Group debriefing in February 1945 details the sudden appearance of 2 Me-262s over Braunschweig, which destroyed a lead B-24 and damaged 3 others before disappearing into cloud cover. Yet these victories were fleeting. Allied air superiority increasingly dictated the tempo of operations. Escorting P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings, and even Spitfires patrolled in ever larger numbers, coordinating through radar and ground control. Reconnaissance flights consistently reported Me-262s grounded by destroyed fuel depots or scattered across makeshift airfields. Even operational jets often launched with inadequate armament or improvised maintenance. A captured war diary from the 4th Air Group confirms that pilots frequently abandoned missions due to engine failure, highlighting the fragility of the technological marvel. The psychological effect of the Me-262, however, remained pronounced. Allied pilots described an almost instinctive fear at the jet's appearance. Lieutenant William Bill Thompson, flying a P-51 over northern Germany in March 1945, noted in his post-war journal, "You see it, hear it, there is nothing like it. The instinct is to dive, to flee, but it's faster than anything else. One moment you're level, the next it's gone, and you realize how small a window you have to react." This fear was not mere legend. Combat reports confirm that bomber formations often broke cohesion to avoid Me-262 attacks, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by piston-engine fighters or flak batteries. Meanwhile, the German High Command attempted desperate measures to maintain Me-262 operational output. Production ramped up in underground facilities such as the Mittelwerk in Thuringia, employing forced labour under harsh conditions. Despite these efforts, deliveries never reached the planned scale. Post-war Lockheed and Messerschmitt records, cross-referenced with Allied intelligence, indicate that of the roughly 1,400 Me-262s produced, fewer than 400 were combat-ready at any one time by mid-1945. Mechanical failures, sabotage, and fuel shortages compounded the crisis, leaving the Luftwaffe unable to mount coordinated counter-offensives. One of the most dramatic Me-262 sorties occurred on March 18, 1945, near the Rhine. A small formation of 6 jets intercepted an incoming B-17 formation, escorted by a dozen P-51s. Combat claims suggest 3 bombers were downed, but 4 Me-262s suffered losses, including 1 pilot captured and another killed. The engagement encapsulated the operational reality of the jets, capable of tactical brilliance in small numbers, but unable to influence strategic outcomes. Detailed analyses from U.S. Air Force Historical Research Agency documents reveal that even when successful, Me-262 victories did not significantly reduce Allied bombing effectiveness due to overwhelming numerical superiority and improved tactical coordination. As the Allies advanced into central Germany in April 1945, Me-262 sorties became increasingly sporadic. Aircraft were hidden in forests, dispersed across small fields, or destroyed outright to prevent capture. Surviving pilots attempted sorties with minimal support, often improvising fuel transfers or cannibalizing parts from damaged jets. Intelligence reports from the period highlight the desperation. One Me-262 unit launched only 2 sorties in a week, both aborted due to engine failure. German command communications, later declassified, reveal frustration and recognition of imminent defeat. The jets are magnificent, but without pilots, fuel, or ordnance, they are silent phantoms. Post-war assessments of the Me-262 underscore this tension between technological promise and operational reality. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, referencing captured Luftwaffe documents, concluded that the Me-262 could have inflicted severe losses if deployed earlier, in larger numbers, and with sufficient training and logistical support. The report noted that delays in jet development, Hitler's insistence on using the Me-262 as a bomber, and logistical collapse prevented the aircraft from achieving its potential. Japanese post-war aviation scholars echoed this sentiment, analyzing the Me-262 alongside the Mitsubishi J-8M and Nakajima Kikka as examples of advanced jet technology constrained by strategic and logistical limitations. Despite its ultimate ineffectiveness in altering the war's outcome, the Me-262 left an enduring legacy for aviation. Allied engineers studied captured jets extensively, influencing post-war designs in the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star and Gloucester Meteor were directly shaped by the insights gained from Me-262 airframes, engines, and aerodynamics. Veteran pilots reflected on their encounters as formative experiences, highlighting lessons in anticipation, adaptation, and the psychological dimension of air combat. By May 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, the Me-262 ceased to exist as a combat force. The few remaining jets were surrendered, destroyed, or captured. Yet the legend endured. Pilots and historians alike remembered the terror of facing a machine that, in the right circumstances, might have dramatically altered the balance of air power. Lieutenant Colonel Giles, reflecting at a 1985 reunion in Hawaii, summarized the consensus among Allied veterans. It wasn't the numbers, or even the kills. It was the fear, the speed, the knowledge that this plane could outrun everything. That is why it still haunts airmen's memories. Part 6 closes on a dual note. The Me-262 as both a technological marvel that foreshadowed the jet age, and a stark example of how innovation alone cannot overcome logistical, strategic, and human constraints. Its terror was real, its victories measurable, but its limitations underscore a timeless principle of warfare. Technology is only as decisive as the circumstances that enable it to succeed. With the surrender of Germany in May 1945, the Me-262's operational chapter ended abruptly, but its influence on aviation had only begun. Allied forces, eager to glean every technological insight from the Luftwaffe's jet program, moved swiftly to secure remaining airframes, engines, and technical documents. The US Army Air Forces and the Royal Air Force systematically combed through German airfields in Bavaria, Saxony, and Thuringia. At Lechfeld and Straubing airfields, intact Me-262s were loaded onto transport trucks, shipped to temporary storage depots, and catalogued for study. According to US National Archives records, the initial goal was to evaluate performance characteristics, engine mechanics, armament integration, and aerodynamic design. Operation Lusty, the Allied project tasked with retrieving German aeronautical technology, became the conduit through which Me-262s were transported to the United States. Lockheed engineers and test pilots, including Major Richard Scherer and Captain Herbert Smith, oversaw the disassembly, shipment, and reassembly of multiple jets. Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum archives described the painstaking process of cataloguing every component. Jumo 004 engines, hydraulic systems, pressurized fuel lines, and high-speed airframe alloys were examined under controlled conditions. These inspections revealed both the brilliance and the fragility of the design. The Me-262 could achieve speeds approaching 540 miles per hour in level flight, a velocity that Allied piston engine fighters could not match. But engines were notoriously unreliable, often requiring overhaul after fewer than 25 operational hours. At Wright Field, Ohio, American test pilots flew several captured Me-262s in simulated combat conditions. Flight logs from March 1946 show pilot notes emphasizing acceleration, climb rate, and handling at high subsonic speeds. Captain Scherer observed, "It's an aircraft ahead of its time. In a dogfight with Spitfires or Mustangs, it is not just faster. It dictates the terms of engagement. One mistake and the enemy is gone before you can respond." Yet engineers also noted weaknesses that had constrained Luftwaffe deployment. Throttle response was sluggish at low speeds, jet engines were highly susceptible to foreign object damage, and runway requirements exceeded what many German airfields could provide under wartime pressure. Meanwhile, British test units evaluated their own captured Me-262s. Gloucester Aircraft Company engineers compared jet handling characteristics with the Meteor 1, their first operational jet fighter. RAF test reports, preserved in the National Archives, UK, emphasised the tactical advantages of speed and climb, while highlighting maintenance difficulties. Pilots' diaries from the Royal Air Force noted a common sentiment. "We had the technology, but the Germans had the vision to get it airborne first." Facing a 262 in combat was unnerving, not because it always killed you, but because it could vanish from sight before you could even aim. The psychological dimension of the Me-262's legacy cannot be overstated. Combat veterans from both sides consistently recalled the terror induced by the jet's sudden appearance. Post-war interviews at the 1962 US-Japanese Aviation History Symposium and the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii repeatedly cite pilot statements. Even when outnumbered, the Me-262 commanded respect. Its presence forced alterations in Allied bomber tactics, accelerated the development of escort strategies, and emphasized radar-guided interception techniques. In many ways, the Me-262 served as a catalyst for modern aerial warfare doctrine, particularly in emphasizing speed, altitude advantage, and missile-like engagement philosophy. Beyond direct study, captured Me-262s shaped post-war aircraft design internationally. In the United States, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star was heavily informed by German jet research, including wing design and engine integration. North American aviation engineers examined Me-262 armament systems to improve cannon installation on future jets. In Britain, the Gloucester Meteor benefited from data on high-speed aerodynamics and jet engine placement, while Soviet engineers reverse-engineered airframes to accelerate their own MiG-9 and MiG-15 programs. These design advancements underscored a critical lesson. While the Me-262 did not win the war, its influence extended far into the jet age, shaping aircraft development for decades. Simultaneously, the captured jets became tools of propaganda and morale assessment. US and British newsreels featured footage of Me-262s being flown under controlled conditions, often juxtaposed against veteran Allied fighters to illustrate technological evolution. Newspapers, technical journals, and aviation magazines disseminated accounts of the jet's performance, emphasizing the fear factor that had haunted Allied crews. These narratives contributed to the enduring mythos of the Me-262 as both a terror weapon and a symbol of German technological ingenuity. However, post-war assessments also highlighted the limitations that prevented the Me-262 from altering the outcome of the war. Allied historians noted that, had the jets been produced in larger numbers and introduced earlier, say 1943, their impact might have been profound. Delays caused by political interference, Hitler's insistence on adapting the aircraft for fighter-bomber roles, and material shortages meant that even as late as March 1945, operational squadrons numbered only in the hundreds. Even experienced pilots faced mechanical failure rates that rendered missions risky, further limiting strategic effectiveness. Memoirs from Luftwaffe veterans emphasize this tension between potential and reality. Oberstleutnant Johannes Weber, who commanded a Me-262 unit, later reflected, "We held a weapon that could have changed the skies of Europe. Yet our strength was fragmented, our supply chains broken, our pilots inexperienced. The aircraft was a lion without teeth in the end." Captured technical documents corroborate this, revealing that maintenance bottlenecks, fuel scarcity, and Allied air superiority consistently undermined operational impact. By the end of 1946, most captured Me-262s had been either tested to destruction, distributed to museums, or incorporated into post-war research programs. A handful remained in flying condition, used to train US, British, and Soviet pilots in jet tactics. Today, airframes preserved in institutions such as the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum and the Royal Air Force Museum stand as monuments to the jet's dual identity, a revolutionary technology that inspired fear in combat yet fell short of strategic victory. In sum, Part 7 establishes that the Me-262's post-war journey was one of analysis, adaptation, and legacy building. Captured aircraft, technical documentation, and veteran testimony shaped the jet age, influencing design philosophies, training programs, and operational doctrines worldwide. Though it never fulfilled its wartime potential, the Me-262's shadow loomed large over aviation history, its speed, firepower, and psychological effect forever etched into the memory of those who faced it. The jet's story reinforces a crucial lesson. Technological marvels, no matter how advanced, require strategy, logistics, and human expertise to translate potential into decisive results. By mid-1945, as the Third Reich teetered on the brink of collapse, historians and strategists turned their attention to the Messerschmitt Me 262. Its operational history, though brief, left a profound mark on aerial warfare. While the jet did not change the war's outcome, its performance, psychological impact, and post-war influence were undeniable. Allied assessments, particularly those from the US Strategic Bombing Survey and captured Luftwaffe records, emphasized the Me-262's extraordinary capabilities. Its top speed exceeded 540 miles per hour, allowing it to outrun any Allied piston engine fighter. It could climb at a rate of 4,700 feet per minute, while its four Mk 108 30mm cannons could devastate bomber formations in mere seconds. During the winter of 1944–45, bomber crews reported attacks that seemed almost supernatural. Jets appearing from the clouds in a flash, striking with pinpoint accuracy, and disappearing before fighters could respond. One B-17 pilot later recalled, "You knew you were done the moment you saw that silver streak. It moved faster than fear itself." German pilots, while proud of their technological triumph, faced enormous operational challenges. Fuel shortages, spare parts scarcities, and inexperience among young pilots limited the Me-262's effectiveness. Oberleutnant Hans Müller, a veteran Me-262 pilot, reflected decades later, "We possessed the world's fastest fighter, but speed alone could not save us from starvation, broken engines, or Allied numbers." Many aircraft were destroyed on the ground during bombing raids, further diminishing their potential. The psychological effect on Allied aircrews was immense. Bomber formations developed new evasive maneuvers, and fighter pilots were instructed to attack Me-262s during takeoff and landing, the only phases when they were vulnerable. The jet's presence forced strategic adjustments, even if it could not achieve decisive results. Beyond the battlefield, the Me-262's influence on aviation technology was significant. Allied engineers studied captured jets extensively. The Jumo 004 engines, though notoriously unreliable, informed post-war jet propulsion systems. Aerodynamic innovations, including swept wings and nacelle-mounted engines, influenced the design of aircraft such as the F-86 Sabre, MiG-15, and de Havilland Vampire. Maintenance crews learned the importance of supply chains, proper fueling procedures, and pilot training in high-performance jet operations. In many ways, the Me-262 accelerated the global transition to the jet age. Cultural memory reinforced its mystique. Films, documentaries, and veterans' memoirs often portrayed the Me-262 as the ultimate German wonder weapon. Even Allied pilots who never encountered it respected its threat. At reunions and historical symposiums, stories of the silver streaks cutting through bomber formations highlighted not only the technological leap, but also the psychological tension they created. Historians continue to debate what-if scenarios. Could an earlier, mass-produced Me-262 have altered the European air war? Analysts argue it might have temporarily delayed Allied bombing campaigns, inflicted heavier losses, and forced tactical changes. But fundamental limitations, fuel scarcity, pilot attrition, and Allied numerical superiority made sustained success improbable. The aircraft's brilliance collided with wartime logistics, timing, and strategy. Its legacy, however, extends beyond combat records. The Me-262 demonstrated the potential of jet propulsion, accelerated aircraft design innovation, and forced a rapid evolution of aerial tactics. Preserved examples in museums and private collections remind visitors of both the promise and the practical limits of wartime technology. Its story is a study in contrasts, a marvel of engineering constrained by circumstance, a psychological weapon that could inspire awe and terror without altering history's trajectory. Ultimately, the Me-262 terrified Allied pilots, challenged conventional tactics, and inspired post-war aviation, yet it could not overcome the collapse of the Third Reich. Its design, the fear it instilled in enemy pilots, and the operational lessons it provided endured far beyond the war, influencing aircraft development and tactical thought for decades. The Messerschmitt Me 262 remains a symbol of human ingenuity, a warning about relying solely on technological superiority, and a bridge into the jet age that reshaped the skies forever. As the war drew to a close, the Me-262's shadow lingered long after the last German fuel depot ran dry. For Allied pilots, it remained a symbol of the razor-thin margin between life and death in the skies over Europe. Stories of its speed, firepower, and sudden attacks circulated in mess halls and reunion halls for decades, a mixture of awe and respect. Beyond its immediate impact, the jet's technological innovations reshaped aviation. Post-war, American, British and Soviet engineers dissected captured aircraft, reverse engineering engines, airframes and weapons systems. The Me-262 became a blueprint for the first generation of operational jet fighters, accelerating the dawn of the jet age by years. Its lessons extended beyond aircraft design. Logistics, pilot training and maintenance strategies were all re-evaluated in light of the jet's strengths and weaknesses.